Aloha and welcome to Hana, Kakou. We're a weekly program on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. I'm Keli'i Akina, president of the Grassroots Institute. People look at our political climate in Hawaii and often remark that it's always been one way and it always will remain the same, particularly in our state's largest party, the Democratic Party. But many things have happened recently, not only the passing away of Senator Daniel Inouye and the retirement of Senator Kakou. There are new voices that are emerging within the Democratic Party that often are not noticed. But today we've got one of those new voices with us who represents the growing diversity within the state's largest party. And I'd like to welcome her today, Sharon Har, representative of the 42nd District. Sharon, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, Dr. Akina.
You're doing a great job as a representative.
Oh, thank you. You know, I just want to say very quickly, as the former House Judiciary Vice Chair, you and the Grassroots Institute of Hawaii you've always come out to testify, and your testimony has always been very reasoned, very thoughtful, and very balanced. So I just want to thank you for participating in the process. And
thanks for the opening commercial you gave to the Grassroots Institute.
I really appreciate it. I really do appreciate it.
Well, you know, we're not interested in party line.
Right.
We're interested in working with those representatives and senators that align on the issues where we think there's a good position for the people of Hawaii.
Yeah.
And one of the things I want to talk to you a bit about is issues later on, but I'm just dying to know a bit about your experience within the Democratic Party, because you don't line up with all of the traditional issues if we go back 10 years per se. But there are many Democrats who actually are speaking for the kinds of issues that you are addressing today.
Yes. I think one of the greatest things about the Democratic Party of Hawaii is that we are the Big Ten. We are this diverse party. And unfortunately, though, over the years, I think there's been this misperception of what the Democratic Party has become, that we are we only look out for special interests. And I think that is absolutely not the case, particularly in the year 2015. You're beginning to see a group of Democrats who are very outspoken, who are not rubber stampers, who put their constituents' needs before the party's needs because they understand that that's the direction in which they need to lead.
Very good. Now, you've got a lot of good things to say, but if I could ask you to move your hair off the microphone.
Of course, thank you.
That's terrific.
Okay.
Well, very good.
Thank you.
And that is right. But you know, a lot of people, and by this I also mean the Democrat rank and file out there in the public, tend to regard the party as monolithic.
Yes.
That there are powers at the top, that there is the old boys network. What is your thought about that?
You know, again, I think in the year 2015, things have changed so much. I mean, I think back in the day, you did have that faction, but if you look at the type of legislators who are being elected today, we're much more independent. We really look at what our constituents want. We put our constituents' needs before what the party expects of us to do. And we believe that in this day and age, there's no such thing as the old boys network anymore, because that is what the population, that is what our constituents are demanding of us, to be thoughtful thinkers, to think independently.
Well, there's often the caricature that the Democratic Party is the party of tax and spend. Bigger government programs, more government solutions, less leaving in the coffers of the taxpayer and so forth. But you've promoted legislation that doesn't fall along those lines.
Yes. As a former member of the House Finance Committee, which is the money committee in the House of Representatives, during the Great Recession, which began in 2007, ended in 2012, I'm very proud of the fact that this was the hardest time in Hawaii's economic history. Not even after 9/11 did we have such shortfalls. We were looking at shortfalls of up to $1.2 billion. And when you're looking at a 2-year biennium budget of $10 billion, that's not a lot of money. I mean, that's a huge amount of money, because you're talking about just to give you an idea, we appropriate approximately $1.2 billion to the Department of Education alone.
Yes.
So during the Great Recession, there was a 2-year period when we were looking at a $1.2 billion shortfall. So I was very proud, under the leadership of then Calvin Say, the House Speaker, and Marcus Oshiro, the Finance Chair, we made sure that we did not raise the general excise tax, and we made sure that we were trying to help Hawaii's people to get through this economic malaise that the state had seen.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the GET or sales tax as well here. As you know, last legislative term, there were many measures for public funding that attempted to tap into raising the GET sales tax. One of them succeeded, which was an extension to the rail funding.
Yes.
But others of them, in fact, I was surprised at how many looked to the GET and sales tax, and I learned something. I had known this, but never really paid attention to it. How much of our state's funding actually depends upon this?
Yes,
Isn't it
absolutely.
Quite a bit?
Well, I think first and foremost, people need to understand that the general excise tax is not a sales tax. We are very different from other states that have a sales tax.
Whenever I say them, I
That's
slash mash them together because
that's
that's the
how
way we
people put it
present
in
to people.
context. But people need to understand, the general excise tax is the cost to do business in the state of Hawaii.
Yes.
A sales tax is levied only against the end user, which is the consumer.
That's
which
right.
is why in many states you see such a high tax rate of 8%, 9%, 10%, even 12%, because it's only levied against a very limited base, which is the taxing base, which is the end consumer, the purchaser. Whereas in the state of Hawaii, the general excise tax is levied against, it's the cost to do business. Anyone who's doing business in the state of Hawaii is levied, has this tax that's levied upon, which is why it's called a very regressive tax.
And it's levied over and over
Yes,
and over
but
again.
it depends also where you're
Right.
at in terms of manufacturing, distributing.
Yes.
It's not the same 4.7% on
That's
Oahu.
right.
It could be 0.5%. It just depends on where you're at in that timeline.
Now, when it gets downline, ultimately to the consumer, to those who have the lowest level of income, who pretty much, because of their spending habits, when they get cash, walk into a store,
Right.
buy the milk, buy the eggs, or have to have medical services as well, they get hit with this.
Yes.
And when they get hit with this, as we've measured in the Grassroots Institute, that's up to 13% on average of all of their income.
Yes.
That's huge. They don't have
Yes.
tax strategies.
Exactly. And
They
I
don't
think
buy wholesale at Costco and so
yes,
forth.
and they don't have the means to do so, unfortunately.
So you are against continued increasing of the GET for funding projects?
Yes, I have always been against raising the general excise tax, and the reason being that if you actually look at government and all the waste that is in government, and that was one of the exercises that I enjoyed so much about the Great Recession, we spent hours, I mean endless nights, 2 o'clock in the morning, going through the state budget, line by line, and looking at what services were not essential government services. And I think people have to remember there are 3 core functions of government. That is health and human services, education, and public safety. That's it. And so what we did in the Finance Committee during the Great Recession, we went page by page, department by department, and we looked to see what was not a core function of government, and we eliminated it to ensure that government was getting back to basics and what we should be
Let me
doing.
understand this. You're a Democrat.
Yes.
And you were actually involved in a process in which you tried to reduce the size
Yes.
and spending of government.
Yes, absolutely. And if anybody knows, then former Speaker Calvin Say,
Yes.
he's a business owner. And as a small business owner, he understands the ramifications of continuing to tax and to put these small businesses out, because again, you're affecting our local economy, you're hurting our local businesses, you're hurting people from being employed. And so he understood the ramifications. And so that is why we always took a very conservative approach to the state budget.
Well, now this goes back to the original conversation we were having, and that is the emerging direction of the Democratic Party.
Yes.
I've spent some time in Beijing and other cities in China teaching, and some of my colleagues there have remarked that Hawaii looks very similar to China in that it has a single party system,
Yes.
which sounds kind of funny coming from Marxists in their own analysis. But when we explore that topic a little further, we find something else really going on in Beijing and elsewhere, and that is a party that is so big actually begins to create diversity within it.
Absolutely.
Instead of a single voice, you've got voices that are sometimes very much at odds with each other.
Yes.
Can you talk about that within Hawaii's Democratic Party?
Yes. Well, again, I think you first have to look at what is very important to look at is the fact that who our governor is at the time.
Okay.
Oftentimes it's the governor and that party, which is who controls who in the Democratic Party, who the leaders are in the Democratic or the Republican parties. In this situation, we know that Governor Abercrombie was defeated by Governor Ige. We had a new shift in the leadership of the Democratic Party. So now we have a woman from Maui, Stephanie Ohigashi,
Right.
and she's very inclusive. I think the former director was a former state senator, Dante Carpenter, and I think his approach was a very different type of approach that he brought to the Democratic Party, whereas Stephanie is now really looking to change things up a little bit more with the party. So I think first and foremost, that really does reflect Governor Ige's style, which is a little bit more collaborative as opposed to kind of, talking down and pontificating. It's much more of a collaborative style. And Stephanie is very much that way. And so I see just under the short time that she's been the director of the Democratic Party, the changes that we've seen. It's much more inclusive now. It's not about, oh, you must do what the Democratic Party tells you to do. It's about being inclusive and accepting all of us for all of the positions which we hold.
Well, one of those areas where I sense that there is greater inclusiveness is the presence now of voices that promote what we would call free market economics.
Yes.
In the roughest terms, free market economics is the opposite of central government control over all things, as we've seen in the socialist states, as we've seen in the Soviet Union and China and so forth. In a free market economy, government plays a limited role.
Yes.
It protects property, it protects contracts and so forth, so that the forces of supply and demand are at hand.
Right.
Where do you stand on free market economics?
I absolutely think that free market is something we need to look at in the state of Hawaii. I think that, obviously we are a union state, and there's a reason why we're a union state. It goes back to our history back in the 40s and 50s from sugarcane, pineapple, and there is a reason for that. But we still have to look at balancing the needs to ensure that a free market can come in and assist our economy while protecting workers' jobs. And I still think that is possible. A lot of people don't think the two can coexist, but I firmly believe that if all the parties come to the table and make certain concessions, that absolutely can happen for the greater good.
So it's not an either-or thing.
Exactly.
It's not unions
Exactly.
or no unions.
Exactly.
It's not free market versus a huge welfare system.
Exactly.
Somehow, elements of our heritage can be designed in such a way as to work toward a growing free market. Let's talk about one, for example.
Of course.
As you're aware, this last term in the state legislature, a hard look was put upon the state hospital system.
Yes.
In some of the testimony that we presented, we pointed out that 70% of Maui's hospital budget was going to labor. But while that was rising as a cost of doing business, income was shrinking because of the new federal insurance guidelines for health. As a result, we really had a bankrupt system. But nobody knew that because the legislature kept putting money into it. And so a monumental measure took place. And I really want to sing the praises of our state legislature and of Governor Ige for signing into law a bill that would allow the private-public partnership to take, or at least would allow Maui Hospital to put out to bid to private companies the labor force, which is monumental. And yet it doesn't harm the labor because almost everybody is likely to be hired back. Now, this is an example of the growing free market at work. What are your thoughts about that?
Okay, in the interest of full disclosure, I did
Yes.
vote with reservations on that measure, and
Sure.
I need to explain why. If you actually read the bill, I had some very serious concerns about the financing
I remember.
mechanism. I actually spoke out because I did not believe the way that the bill was drafted was a true public-private partnership. And in fact, I believed that this private entity was essentially getting the whole kitchen sink along with this whole, taking not only the hospital, Maui Memorial, but taking all of the assets with it. They were taking CIPs with it, so they were taking the infrastructure, and that to me was an issue. I mean, a public-private partnership, you have the private entity come in, and if they're going to manage the entity, that's one thing, but we were essentially giving everything away, which was not, that is not a typical situation. So I still had a lot of reservations, and I did talk to proponents and opponents of the measure. I continue to think that that there was a lawsuit that was recently filed by the UPW. And so at this point in time, I think we just have to step back. There's nothing we can do at this point. We have to wait and see how the courts rule. There are some constitutional issues involved regarding the contract clause. And so at this point in time, I think that the legislature did what it did for financial reasons, but we have yet to see what happens and how the courts rule.
Well, I think nobody wants for us to have a sweetheart deal, so to speak.
Right.
But the direction of moving into looking into more flexible measures for how we handle labor at the hospitals, a little more autonomy, in fact, in terms of being able to create a business model is a very positive thing.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's something that has to be examined, it has to be looked at. And again, it's about bringing the union leaders together, bring them to the table. Let's bring management and labor together, and let's work on some, again, if both groups make certain concessions, again, I think that the two can coexist with each other, but it's just always, there's this line that seems to be drawn in the sand, and it's either our way or it's your way. And again, the unions were very up in arms, obviously HGA and UPW. HGA was the lead union, and they were very upset that this bill had
That's
passed.
right.
And so, again, but they're not the ones who filed the lawsuit, interestingly, so.
And the point that I'm trying to get to as well is this. It was largely Democrats.
Yes.
It had to be
Yes.
Democrats who brought about
Right.
the passage of this bill
Yes.
to put the labor contract out to bid.
Yes.
And that would never have happened.
Yeah.
Could you imagine that having happened
Yeah.
prior to the passing away of Senator Noye?
I think a lot of it has to do with our House leadership now,
Yes.
which is, obviously our House Speaker is Joe Suki, who's from the island of Maui, and who he's been in office for 16, 18 years, I think, don't quote me, maybe 18, 20 years at this point. And, House Speaker Suki, I think, obviously, he cares about healthcare on Maui. He cares about Maui
Yes,
Memorial. He has a
that's
vested
right.
interest for his constituents. And so he did not want to see the hospital go out. And so, to his credit, he was the one who led the charge on this issue.
That's right.
And so, and I think, again, you had to have the Democrats who had to fall in line and who had to vote up on that bill in order for its passage.
Well, we see emerging new directions in
Yes.
the Democratic Party, and you're part of that. When we come back,
Yes.
I'd like to talk to you about another very important aspect of your life and your profession, and that is your faith.
Yes, absolutely.
And how you have been public about your faith as a Christian, and how you integrate that into or with your role as a public official. This is Keli'i Akina. We're talking with Representative, not Senator yet, Representative Sharon Har from the Hawaii State Legislature, and we're looking at new directions for Democrats in the state of Hawaii. We'll be right back after this short break. Don't go away.
Hi, Jay.
Hi, Keith.
Very good.
My name's Keith Bettinger.
I knew that.
And I'm the host of ThinkTech Asia.
I knew that too.
Here on ThinkTech.
Fabulous. You got a great show going, Keith.
Thank you very much. And for our viewers out there that are interested in ThinkTech Asia, it airs every Tuesday from 4 to 4:45, and it can be accessed online at thinktech.com.
Yeah, so what kind of guests you like?
Well, we have a number of guests from academia, from practitioners of international affairs. Sometimes we have military officials. Sometimes we have public officials on the show. And our goal, we try to talk about current issues in South Asia, Southeast Asia, East Asia, and Central Asia, all throughout the Asian realm in more depth than you would find in traditional mainstream
That's the
media.
difference, isn't it?
Exactly.
That you're reaching out beyond what ordinary news media would do.
Right.
And that's why we like you so much.
We're trying to provide a thinking person's perspective, an intelligent perspective on what's going on, and we're both sides of the story, or even when there's more than two sides, we try to cover every angle. And I think that's one of the big benefits that we provide here at ThinkTech. Is it's a really innovative source of educational programming for the people of Hawaii.
You're great, Keith. You are a great host. You got a great show going on. I watch it every week.
Thanks very much.
Why don't
Jay.
you guys watch it every week too, okay?
4:45 to 4 to 4:45 every Tuesday.
Welcome back to Hana, Kakou. We're here every week on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. I'm Keli'i Akina, president of Grassroots Institute. The Grassroots Institute is an independent public policy think tank. By independent, it means we don't get paid by government or by the university or by political parties, so we can be a voice that serves as a watchdog and a commentator, and none of us lose our jobs. But in reality, what we want to do is focus on issues. Most people here in the state of Hawaii want what's good for everybody and for our keiki. So we say, e hana Kakou. You know that old saying, e pule Kakou, let's pray together? At Grassroots, we also say, e hana Kakou, let's work together. Let's join people together working for a better economy, government, and society. And we're very grateful for our partnership with ThinkTech Hawaii. Every week we're here. ThinkTech Hawaii puts out about 35 hours of original content from Honolulu every week. That's a lot of work. Visit them on thinktechhawaii.com. Now back to my guest today, Sharon Har. I truly enjoy talking with her because she's focused about issues. She's concerned about what's good for the people, not necessarily party lines. But there is one issue that is often divisive in our society today, and it takes very skilled individuals to be able to navigate how to put this issue forth in the public. And I'm talking about the role of faith. So we're going to go right back to Sharon. Sharon, there's no secret. You've made it known that you are a person of faith,
Yes.
that you have a religious faith.
Yes.
You are a born-again Christian, if that's the correct term to use. And yet at the same time, you occupy public office. Have you found that that's a challenge to integrate both of those together here in Hawaii?
Absolutely. I think there are certain days I wake up and I think, God, why am I in this position? Why have you put me here? And when I pray, God tells me that I put you here for a reason. The story that's very...
Now, let me just stop you there.
Yes.
Because we have listeners who are probably wondering, now, does God actually talk?
Okay, yes.
You know, we
Yes.
didn't know this before we voted for her, that
Yes,
she hears
yes,
voices
yes,
in her
yes,
head.
yes.
I mean, but we really have a diverse community.
Yes, we do. And I think that it's important to remember that, again, whether you want to name, whether you're Mormon, whether you're Catholic, whether you're Buddhist, I think religion has a place in our daily lives. And it's not about me sitting here attempting to legislate morality on anybody, but I do believe that there's a reason why we have a set of laws. I mean, and whether you want to take the religious standpoint, the viewpoint from the religious perspective, from whether the secular perspective, we live within a confines of laws in order to ensure that we have a civilized society. And I think that being a person of faith, I think, helps me get through the day, because I think that we're living in some very challenging times right now. I mean, you see what's happening right now.
That's right.
Whether it's the U.S. Supreme Court legislating from the bench, you know, whether you see the legalization of marijuana, we're now normalizing marijuana like it's a great thing, and our kids continue to now, we're just sending the wrong message to our children. So, you know, I think that religion is something that helps me navigate, you know, my daily life through what I do every day as a legislator.
Well, there's certainly a personal value
Absolutely.
to religion, and there's a moral value in terms
Yes.
of providing moral guidelines. But you mentioned law earlier, and you do know what you're talking about. You are a lawyer. And let's go straight to the heart of it, the First Amendment.
Yes.
The First Amendment tells us that government shall not establish religion, nor hinder the free
Right.
exercise thereof. How do you honor the First Amendment and yet be a public official who is vocal about your faith and be one who takes stands that promote your moral values?
Well, I think I'll use the same-sex special session as
All
an
right.
example. I never once brought religion into it. I actually criticized the process because, and if anybody listened to any of the arguments that I made, I never brought religion into it because it wasn't about religion at that time for me. It was about the process. The process in terms of passing that bill, first and foremost, it did not have to be done in a special session. I mean, to use taxpayer dollars in a special session, the last time we had a special session was for the super ferry. I distinctly remember we had, because at the time, there was a lawsuit that had been filed, and so what had happened was we attempted to allow, the lower court had said that the super ferry could not operate until the environmental impact statement was
Right.
conducted. And so we in the legislature went in for a 5-day special session. They were losing $5 million a day, so we said, okay, you know what, we don't want to lose this as a potential business. And so what we decided to do was go in for a 5-day special session, and we allowed them to operate. The Supreme Court, the Hawaii Supreme Court, overturned what we did and said what we did was special legislation. And so again, you have to look at the circumstances for a special session. Did it rise to the level? Apparently, Governor Abercrombie thought so. But if you just looked at the entire process itself, there were so many problems with the bill.
Certainly.
I argued against the committee report, that there were factual inaccuracies in the committee report. I argued about the process in terms of people being given their 2 minutes to even come and talk. I mean, this was the first time in Hawaii's history, this was the single most divisive issue in the state of Hawaii. And again, overwhelmingly, the population, 4-1, who came to testify was in opposition, you know, to the bill, and yet to SB 1, and yet it passed overwhelmingly. And
So you were not voting your personal views on marriage or same-sex marriage. What you were doing was dealing with a very specific piece of legislation
Absolutely.
written in a certain way. And the mechanics of that simply failed muster.
Exactly.
And you could not get behind it. So you were one of at least, what, 13
yes.
Democrats
Yes.
who said, this is not good policy.
That's right.
And that's the basis in which you voted. Now, here's the thing. It's very difficult for people in the public, including educated people like media, to separate the issues.
Yes.
To parse a bill and whether it was vetted properly, whether due diligence was done, to separate that from the bumper sticker substance of the
Yes,
bill, so to
yes.
speak. So what does that tell us about the voting public, including the media as well? What are your thoughts about that?
You know, I think with the advent of social media, that too has been a disservice. There's been a major disservice with social media, because oftentimes people just read it, they think, oh, I read it on the internet, so it must be true.
That's right,
I
and
have to
those are
tell
legislators.
Exactly, absolutely.
Just kidding.
And so I tell people all the time, you have to do your own due diligence. You have to do your own research. And actually, if you go to the Capitol website, capitol.hawaii.gov, it is a very user-friendly website.
Right, one of the best in the nation.
It really is. We've received, I mean, people have nationally recognized our website as one of the most user-friendly. And I tell people all the time, I try to teach people, you know, go to the public access room. They will teach you. It's a free, you know, government
That's right.
service to teach you how to track legislation if there's any issue you want to follow. And so people have to want to be interested in the issue. And so I thought it was interesting that so many of these people, this was the one issue that caused them, it was such a passionate issue for so many people that they actually, you know, many people actually lost their jobs. They got tickets for parking their car illegally. legally. They were just waiting to have their 2 minutes to be heard. And so I think it's a very interesting phenomenon that you have these people here, but what was so interesting to me, Dr. Akina, was the fact that many people who showed up to testify were not, in fact, registered voters.
Now that's a fascinating
Yes.
fact that you actually exposed.
Yes.
And I just want to preface that a little bit for our viewers here. There were many people who belonged to the faith-based movement that opposed same-sex marriage, that opposed SB1. And in record numbers, they testified. To testify, you have to actually register and
Right.
put your name there. And Sharon was responsible for actually correlating that with voter registration records. And you found something that was rather astonishing.
Yes.
What was that?
So during the special session, the lead committee on SB1 was the Judiciary Committee, of which I was the vice
That's
chair.
right.
So if people may recall, I was sitting there on the stage with my computer, and every time somebody came up to testify, I typed in their name to see if they were a registered voter. And of those from the faith-based community, or those who are in opposition to SB1, approximately 40% were not registered voters.
So you had people who were engaging the public policy process by
Yes.
going down and voicing their position,
Yes.
but they had not even registered to vote. What does
Yes.
that tell you?
You know, I think that, again, in my personal experience, I think that people, unless something affects them directly, it has a personal impact to them, they are not going to register to vote. And what people don't understand in the state of Hawaii today, I mean, in 2014, we went to an all-time voter turnout low of 52.3%. And I think this number is so staggering, but we have to talk about this. In Hawaii right now, as of July 2014, we have a population of approximately 1.4 million people. Okay, now
Right.
you have to look at this. Let's say approximately 300,000 are under the age of 18. So those who can vote, 1.1 million. Now, if you look at the general election numbers, 369,000 people voted. So you're talking about 369,000 people making the decision for 1.4 million people. So approximately 26% of the population is making the decisions for the majority.
And we allow that to
Yes.
happen by default,
Exactly.
simply because most of us do not bother to register and then go down to vote.
Well, you know, half the battle too, Dr. Akina, is I know a lot of people, so look at the numbers. Back in 2014, the November 2014 election, approximately 700,000 people were registered to vote and only 369,000 voted. So again, what does that tell you? It's one thing to register, but if you're not actually going out and voting, then you're allowing the minority to make the decisions. And that's exactly
That's
what is
something.
happening in the state of Hawaii today.
So here's the irony. Those who were opposing a piece of legislation, SB1, during the special session, the irony is that had all of them been registered to vote, as well as their colleagues and constituents in the faith-based movement, the outcome might have actually been different,
Yes.
because there might have been different representatives in
Yes.
office and so forth. The simple act of voting could have
Yes.
changed everything.
Absolutely.
And I say this not as a critic, but the reality is it may be a little disingenuous to say that the process was rigged.
Yes,
It was
exactly.
actually how democracy works.
Exactly.
But sadly, when people don't participate.
Yes, and I think I'll let people in on a little secret. I'll let your viewers in on a little secret. Elected officials, we listen to registered voters. We don't listen to those who do not vote. And that's just a fact. I mean, you look at the voting blocks, you look at what groups in Hawaii have been successful because they vote as a block and they're known voters. So the Filipino community is a perfect example. I mean, they represent 11% of the population, and yet they're considered a major voting block because the Filipino community has become very organized. They've gotten their workers, they go out and they register folks to vote, and they get them to vote.
So policymakers in office
Absolutely.
listen to the numbers.
Yes,
They
exactly.
lick their finger, put it in the wind of voter registration and turnout, and they vote accordingly. That's the way the power works. It's
Right.
constitutional.
Right.
Before we end this segment, any advice for your constituents and colleagues in the faith-based movement as they engage the public policy sector, as they attempt to get candidates elected, as they attempt to influence policy? What advice can you give now that you've seen the process?
You know, I think, again, it's not about legislating your morality or, you know, your personal or what your religious views are. I think that if you speak from your heart, and I think that if you have a sound platform in terms of how you see Hawaii being better, how you intend to improve Hawaii as a legislator, what are the key areas in which you want to see improvement? What are you passionate about? What are those areas in which you want to take on and why you're running for office? I mean, one of the first questions people should ask you is, why are you running for office? And if you don't have an answer for that, then you shouldn't be running for office. But again, I think it's about the two, in my opinion, when it comes to your religion, I've never allowed my religion to in any way usurp my duties as a legislator, but I also believe that I've used very rational, my reasoning is very rational and it's very pragmatic in terms of my thought process. So I try not to bring religion into it because for me, my constituents, many of them are faith-based, but again, they don't vote for me based on my faith. They vote for me because they say that I make sound choices to the votes on which I'm taking them. They understand my rationale and why I voted a certain way on a bill.
And the sound choices
Yes.
that you make echoes what you were saying earlier when you referenced a broad range of issues, what's really good for the public.
Exactly.
And so anyone of any ideology or religious faith, if they want to advance particular principles of that, need really to approach the public in terms of offering better policy, better solutions to some of our real needs.
Absolutely.
And when we come back from this break,
Yes.
maybe we can talk a little bit about them, whether it's homelessness,
Yes.
whether it's a better economy, whether it's improving the education system. I know you weigh in on to all of those issues, and that's important. My guest is Representative Sharon Har, who is an emerging Democrat, rising both in her notoriety, popularity, I should say, and power within the Democratic Party, as well as statewide. When we come back, we'll hear her views on several issues as we close today's episode of Hana, Kakou. Don't go away.
Aloha, my name is Jim Shawn, and I'm host of a show called Education Movers, Shakers, and Reformers. Each week, live streaming at noon on ThinkTech Hawaii, we interview people who have special insights into education from early education through K-12, all the way through higher education and beyond. Both public and private are areas we're interested in. We dig deeper. We try to find out what it's really like to be involved in making change, advocating for it, how you reform, what people's philosophies are in reforming it. As I said, we're live streaming every Wednesday at noon on ThinkTech Hawaii. And later on, you can find these interviews on YouTube and on the Hawaii Educational Policy Center website. We hope you join us as many times as possible. Aloha.
Welcome back to our final segment today of Hana, Kakou, here every week. My guest, Sharon Har, is a representative in the state legislature of Hawaii. She's also an attorney, very much involved in shaping public policy for our state. So whether you're in her district, number 42 or not, she's somebody worth watching, especially as she carves new paths as an emerging Democrat leader. Sharon, there are many issues that are going to be coming up in the upcoming legislative session, as well as some that are pending from the past as well. I think anybody looking at the needs in our state is going to see homelessness, the need for affordable housing, right there at the top, if not near the top of problems we've got to solve. You know that I just rushed here today from a grassroots panel that had a blue chip list of panelists, including the state coordinator of housing, as well as heads of many of the agencies, private ones involved in this bringing solution to homelessness. What is the fundamental problem we're looking at here?
I really think the fundamental problem to homelessness is the fact, well, it's rooted in several things, but the fact of the matter is this: there is no silver bullet to homelessness. There is no one size fits all, and the reason being is that you have to look at the homeless population. If you look at the demographics of the homeless population in town versus the homeless population on the leeward side, for example. In town, we have, the research had shown that approximately 70% have some type of mental defect or disease, the homeless living in town, whereas you have the ones on the leeward coast who are actually families. Those are oftentimes called the working homeless. They have jobs, they're living out of their cars, they're having to live on the beach to shower. So that first and foremost is the issue. But secondly, it's rooted in the fact that there is not enough affordable housing. We do not have the inventory here in the state of Hawaii.
In fact, on this program, I've talked with developers and others in the realty market who pretty much are of a consensus that we only develop on about 2.5% to 3% of the entire state landmass. There's no law that says that, but by the time you jump through all the hoops of regulation and zoning,
Land Use Commission and zoning, yes.
Absolutely. And many of them feel that if we were just to increase the supply a little bit and earmark that for affordable housing, we can make a huge difference.
Absolutely.
What are your thoughts?
You know, in the city that I have the privilege of representing, Kapolei, known as the
Yes,
Second
that's
City,
right.
we have many affordable housing projects that we have recently not only just broken ground, but we've had grand openings. So most recently, a couple weeks ago, I was at Kapolei Lofts, which is, you know, it's a state-of-the-art affordable
right.
housing. This is not a project by any means. I mean, it is world-class. This is a beautiful, beautiful project, and it really does give self-esteem to the residents. But I always say this, that homelessness is not government's problem. It is all of our problems. And again, as each day goes by, we are beginning to see homeless in every community. I don't care if you live in Hawaii Kai, I don't care if you live in Kapolei. Homelessness is everywhere now. So much to the fact, I was surprised that one of my colleagues, Representative Marcus Oshiro, had a big homelessness meeting several weeks ago, and I asked him about it, and he said his problem in Wahiawa is that many of the homeless are living in the bushes.
That's
So
right.
it's just a very different they're off the grid, and they come out at nighttime, and they panhandle on California Avenue, but it's a very different type of population versus the one that may be in the Kakou area.
And there may need to be a new paradigm as to how we budget our state's finances.
Yes.
The largest sector, of course, has to deal with health and human services
Exactly,
and education,
exactly.
human needs being met. And yet you're saying homelessness is not the problem of a government, it's all our problem. What do you think about private sector solutions? For example, recently some hotels in Waikiki just got so frustrated, they pulled the money to hire a private agency, Institute for Human Services, to implement street-level solutions.
Yes, and again, I think that it's going to take, well, one of the things I'm going to take a step back on is I think every community needs to understand that homelessness is not just a Kaka'ako issue.
That's right.
It's not just a Waianae issue. This is a state of Hawaii issue, and it's also happening on the neighbor islands. And again, it's because of lack of affordable housing. And what we have to do is, and there's a plethora of issues. Drugs have one thing, mental disease and defect have another issue. I mean, there's a plethora of reasons why people actually become homeless. So what we need to do is, I mean, the legislature this past year, we infused $50 million into the Rental Housing Trust Fund, which is the trust fund that allows the Hawaii Housing Finance Development Corporation, which is the affordable housing arm of the state of Hawaii, which allows them, that gives them the financing to build affordable housing. But I want to take a step back and I want to stress this. Every community needs to embrace affordable housing. I'm tired of these communities who say keep country country, because again, homelessness is a problem for every single individual on this island, and we are one island state. We have to all live together, and we cannot say, oh, this is your problem versus our problem. Every community needs to embrace an affordable housing project so that we can begin to start dealing with this lack of inventory and the reason for why we have all these homeless people.
So what you're saying is it's not about government creating new programs through taxpayer
Exactly.
dollars. It's about getting rid of what we typically call the NIMBY
Exactly,
attitude, not
absolutely.
in my backyard.
That's been a major problem.
Which we need to do as private individuals and as communities. But in addition to that, doesn't government need to perhaps revise, update, and get out of the way of some regulatory and zoning issues that make it hard for private sector developers to develop affordable homes, as well as to provide private sector solutions?
Yes. Most recently, Stanford Carr, who is a developer, and Stanford Carr has done some wonderful affordable housing developments.
He'll be on the show talking about that in a couple of weeks.
And Stanford has noted that if government regulations were to get out of the way, essentially it would only take about 18 months to get these projects to delivery, to have them to be deliverable. The problem right now is it's taking anywhere between 4 to 5 years because of all the government regulations. So what we need to do in government is we need to take a step back, and especially for affordable housing, we need to look at where the bureaucracy is, where the regulations are, what is unnecessary, and what we can fast track to ensure that these projects are being delivered.
When you talk about Stanford Carr, when you talk about cutting a path through the red tape, it's almost as if you're saying the private sector needs to take leadership over the government.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, private sector has a lot of great ideas, and oftentimes, people say to me, oh, Representative Har, we don't do that in government, no, no, no. And I always say, wait a minute, we're government. We should be able to do what we want to do because we have the power to think outside the box. I come from the private sector. I work at a law firm, and for me, it's about private sector thinking. So I try to bring that type of thinking into government. I try to think outside the box and instead of saying no, 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 I want to think about a creative solution and think outside the box so that we can be problem solvers as opposed to being the problem makers.
On another issue, there's growing diversity within the Democrat Party and the leadership at the legislature, and we're talking about medical marijuana and the dispensaries dispensaries that were authorized with legislation last year. Your thoughts on that?
If you look at the numbers again, I think the numbers very much align as to the Democrats who voted no on same-sex marriage and the Democrats who voted no on medical marijuana. I think the issue for us, many of those legislators are those of us who represent the West Side. If you look at the demographics and the socioeconomic demographics of the West Side of the Central Oahu as well as the Leeward Side, we have more families, our population is much younger, and again, for us, we do not want to normalize marijuana. There are many of my colleagues who represent town and they represent these communities that are more transient communities where, you know, their neighbors are not talking. In Kapolei, we're all families, we're a city built on families, we all know each other, and unfortunately, drugs are becoming a major problem in our city.
This sounds very similar to another issue that creates two perspectives.
Yes.
And that would be when gambling comes into
Yes.
a region. There are those who see the economic benefits
Yes.
and the way that solves some of the shortfalls of state government funding. But there are others who see an underbelly.
Yes.
The impact socially.
Socially, absolutely.
And upon parties that actually get taken advantage of it by this. Is that what you're talking about with the legalization of marijuana,
Absolutely.
medical marijuana clinics?
Yes, and I think if you look at the votes, how the votes fell, it's very interesting. You know, my colleagues who represent the urban core are the ones who tend to think they refer to marijuana as medicine. And I'm not debating the medicinal qualities. I absolutely believe, I've looked at the research, and I do believe there are medicinal qualities. It's just, it's not in the THC, which is the part that gets you high. It's in the CBDs, the cannabidiol. And what we need to be doing, instead of just saying medical marijuana dispensaries for all, what we need to do is say, let's look at the research and let's try to figure out a way where we can extract the CBDs and ensure it's those healing properties that are getting to our medical marijuana patients. Instead, what we're doing is we're normalizing marijuana. And we must remember is this, first and foremost, marijuana still remains under federal law a Schedule I controlled substance. Number two, we have a presidential election coming up in 2016. While President Obama has said that his administration will not enforce the federal drug policies against the states, who knows what's going to happen in 2016? So all these states, California, Hawaii, Oregon, Colorado, Washington, these states that are moving in this direction, you know, we may have a change in the administration. Well, we will have a change in the administration, but if we have a Republican president, he may take a very different stand than President Obama, and we could see these states now shutting down. So I thought this was a very premature move on our part.
As you describe all of the issues that go into making a wise decision about medical marijuana, you're talking about how complex most policy issues really are,
Yes.
that they involve different perspectives, venues, and so forth. As a legislator, how do you help people do this kind of thinking
Yes.
rather than simply poll what's going to be popular with certain constituents?
Yes. Oftentimes, so well, not every year. What I do before at the beginning of session, I do a community survey, and I ask my constituents, what are the issues that are of importance to you? I will ask them. I'll write out certain issues, whether it's agriculture, whether it's transportation, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's education. I will write out the list, and I'll ask them to rank. Then I ask my constituents, what are the issues that are most pressing to you? What affects your daily life? What is it that I can be doing that will make me represent you at the legislature so that your voice is heard as a constituent, as a resident of the state of Hawaii? But I think it's also incumbent upon voters. They have to also, and I understand people are very busy, it's hard, people working 2 jobs, they're stuck in traffic all day, but it's important for people to take ownership of their vote, to take ownership of their government. Again, government works for the people. It's not the other way around, and yet, again, the minority is making the decisions for the majority. So until people step up and they want to hold government accountable to some of the decisions that we're making, you know, it's not going to happen unless they actually
We
vote.
have to get involved.
Exactly.
I know getting involved is a very important part of your own platform. It's on your heart. You want to see people register to vote.
Yes.
You want to see them get down and vote. And you want to get them involved even beyond that. We've come to the end of our program, but if you have any last words that you'd like to leave with the public, please, I'd love to hear what they are.
Thank you. I just want to thank you for this opportunity again, and to you as and the Grassroots Institute of Hawaii. It's been an honor to be here today. You know, for me, I'm just a regular person. I'm like, you know, I just happen to hold elective office. I've been very privileged to represent my district for 9 years now, and I consider it truly an honor. I take this job very seriously. I think that policymaking is not easy. It's not a black and white proposition. I think that you have to read every single bill very carefully. As an attorney, type A personality, I can't help myself. I do that as, you know, That's just who I am. But I think that I want the people of Hawaii to know that there are legislators who are listening to you. And so it's just a matter, don't get frustrated with the process. Just because you're frustrated doesn't mean you should just walk away and be disenfranchised. That should make you want to step up and say, I'm going to hold government accountable. They're not listening to me. I don't want people to feel frustrated and say, oh, it's the Democratic Party, this monolith that doesn't listen, because that's not who the Democratic Party is. We are the party of inclusion. We are the big tent. We welcome all different types of people. We are a very diverse group. And so I just want to encourage people of the state of Hawaii, don't be frustrated with government, get involved in the process.
Sharon, Representative Har, thank you very
you.
much for being with us today.
Thank you, Dr. Akina.
It's been delightful to have Representative Har of the 42nd District in the Hawaii State Legislature here with us today. She represents that we can work together, Hana Kakou, on the issues of building a better economy, a better government, and a better society. From the Grassroots Institute of Hawaii and ThinkTech Hawaii, we say aloha until next week. Aloha.